Okay, so there are a few angles that I could look at with this. I'm going to try and keep it condensed because I have to make my way out somewhere. But I think it's important to look at some of these issues, and they're issues I've covered before, but I think it's important that they're reiterated. And with what's happening between Australia and China right now, I think it's just a reminder of what all free nations face from the Chinese regime. Let me just quantify free for a second because, um, I don't want to stand accused of throwing the word around. Freedom is contextual here. Free societies are those in which citizens generally have a right to peaceful dissent, to oppose the government if they want to vote against the government if they want to criticize the government if they want to. Free societies are those in which, so long as citizens take responsibility, they can enjoy liberty. If you commit a crime, obviously you'll go to jail. But that's true the world over, virtually. Absolute freedom doesn't exist. But by free societies, we contrast that to totalitarian societies. Free society is one where power can be scrutinized, and where there is abuse of power, it can be held to account. Um, I've never ever tried to make a claim that free societies are perfect. Um, Australia's not perfect. Britain's not perfect. America's certainly not perfect. Um, but in all these examples, you will find that there is a scope for freedom of expression that you will not get in China. You just won't. So, what I want to touch on is the attempts by the Chinese regime to vilify Australia, but branching a bit beyond that. Because it's Australia today, it could be any other country tomorrow. It was Britain last year with the Hong Kong situation. China, in my opinion, and by China, I'm talking about China under the Communist Party. I'm not talking about Chinese people. And I'll quantify that in a minute. But um, China under the Communist Party has very, very few true friends in this world. I mean, the relationship between Britain and Australia and Canada and New Zealand and the United States, there may be some differences. We may not see absolutely everything eye to eye, but we broadly have the same values. So those values, and this can also apply to Western Europe, notwithstanding differences we have over Brexit. I believe we'll survive that. I really do. I think that, say, for example, Germany or France or Denmark or any European country suffered some sort of major hacking by the likes of China, there's no question whose side we would be on. So when we talk about international diplomacy and relations, there's a difference between simply having communications with a country and something deeper. What this country has with countries like Australia is much, much deeper than trade. That's something the Chinese regime needs to understand. China, by contrast, it has trading partners, Pakistan, but I do not believe for a second that Pakistan and China are genuine friends, other than the fact that you can find authoritarianism in both countries. They're very different. I mean, China's a communist state, Pakistan's an Islamic theocracy, or rather, a very conservative Islamic country. So these are not natural bedfellows. The only reason they're cozy is as a bulwark against India, the mutual enemy. And, I say that with the risk of, using blunt language, but that's all it is. North Korea is a failed state. This is a country that has more military than people who can be fed. It's North Korea is not a powerful country. It may have a massive military and a nuclear arsenal, but in so many other areas, it's a very, very weak country. Actually, it's a failed state. Russia, granted, Putin and Xi have certainly shored up a sort of alliance against the Western democracies. But again, look at history. China and Russia have a difficult history. I believe this is temporary. I don't believe there's any deep friendship between China and Russia. I think it's two dictators, Putin and Xi, who are being pragmatic and they're using this as a temporary sort of situation. And both Putin and Xi have tried their best to reignite a Cold War. The Chinese side claims that it's the West and Australia that's trying to reignite a Cold War. No, all Australia done was ask for an independent inquiry into COVID. Australia didn't even blame China. They asked for an independent inquiry into COVID. Now, specifically about this issue of the alleged abuses of Afghans, because believe me, Chinese propagandists will use that and use that and use that. There are serious allegations. The particular photo that they circulated is fake. But the other allegations do need to be taken seriously, and they have been. Australian media has covered it. The Australian government has launched a Brereton report in order to investigate this. And I hope if soldiers were guilty of this, they face justice. There's no excuse for abusing civilians. But there is a fundamental value difference here. Australians know it's wrong. You tell Chinese nationalists about the crimes their country has committed, they deny it. Because the main religion in China is nationalism. So from a very early age, Chinese nationalists are fed this ideology. I've seen it directly. They're instilled with us this idea to always love the party, to always love, and they don't divorce party from country. So they see an attack on the CCP as an attack on China. That's important to understand because the same people then cry racism when you criticize the CCP. And this is another tool that they have. I came across a CCP apologist yesterday claiming that the Western reaction to China is like a new yellow peril. But there's a big difference. In the 1880s, the Yellow Peril was a xenophobic campaign to limit the number of Chinese workers. These were people who built the American railways. That was, plain racism. There's no getting away from it. China then was really a developing country, so the context is totally different. If there is a Yellow Peril today, it's a very crude term, but if there is one, I would say it's justified. It's logical to be concerned and worried about the aggressive rise of China. And I say aggressive because, just because they're not engaged in war doesn't mean they're peaceful. There is absolutely nothing peaceful about stoking up nationalism in other countries and trying to undermine Western democracies, spreading lies about Western democracies. This is what the Chinese regime is doing. There's nothing peaceful about bully boy diplomacy, so-called wolf warrior diplomats who seem to think their job is to insult the nations that they are in. And until the world stands up to them, they're just going to feel emboldened. That's why I really, really staunchly believe there needs to be a united effort. Now, President-elect Biden, has spoken about rebuilding international alliances. I hope that translates as therefore rebuilding alliances to take on China. And it's something I would say that Trump supporters, ignore. They say, oh, Biden's weak on China, Beijing, Biden, all those smears. But it's Donald Trump that has broken down international alliances, not Joe Biden. So, time will tell. If Biden is weak on China, I will be amongst his most vocal critics. But we'll see. We'll see. I sincerely, deeply hope that he does take a robust line. Um, I think that we also need to look at so-called soft power. This is very important because consider, for example, Chinese international students. This is a point I've touched on before, and it's quite personal for me because I've worked with Chinese students. I've had friends who were Chinese international students. Now, it's important to understand they're not all brainwashed communist drones. That's important. Generalizations aren't helpful. Nevertheless, there's no escaping the fact that the Chinese government actively encourages nationalism in a lot of these students. Um, and they get very defensive about this. They say, oh no, we're not the Chinese government, and they get very annoyed by it. They say, we're not Chinese spies. Don't treat us like that. My message to them would be, if you don't want to be perceived in a certain way, then stop defending the CCP. If you don't want to be seen as fifth columnists or CCP operatives, infiltrators, And I, by the way, for the record, I really don't think that most Chinese students are. I think most Chinese students are just students. They just want to get on with their studies. But I think it would be naive to ignore the reality of this, of how they come to Western university campuses, Australia, Britain, and so on, and what do? They wave around the Chinese flag, they demand respect, they try to bully and silence other students. That should be intolerable. But our weak, useless cowardly universities won't stand up to them. They'll give a generic message, oh, you need to respect each other. But last year, I know for a fact that Hong Kong students were reporting getting threatened and bullied. Okay, I'm not just talking about a few names online. I mean actually physically threatened. Not a single Chinese student was expelled. Why not? Why not? These university departments are gutless. They lack a backbone because they're more interested in Chinese money than they are in doing the right thing. And actually, I feel that the biggest challenge we face with this is not necessarily China itself, the Chinese Communist Party. They're going to do what they're going to do. They're a thug regime. They don't believe in playing by the rules of engagement or whatever. They're only interested in power. It's the only interest they have. They're going to do what they're going to do. But we know that. You wouldn't have a snake handler, the snake bites someone, right? You wouldn't then say, "Oh, well, we'll blame the snake." You blame the handler because they're not. That might sound like a crude analogy. It's literally a very spontaneous one, but I really do feel that those who placate China, it's unforgivable. History will judge them harshly. Um, really will. Um, because what they're doing is unforgivable. Showing apathy, showing weakness to a hostile, powerful, foreign belligerent. Final point to Chinese nationals. Yes, China is powerful. I concede that. But I sense a sort of confidence and arrogance. Certainly the arrogance, but there's a confidence there. They believe that because they're pushing Australia around and pushing other countries around, they now have the upper hand. And it might well be that right now they have the upper hand. After all, they've managed to evade criticism from COVID. They've been successful in that, which is a travesty. But I'll say this about the CCP: they're not stupid. They are devious and manipulative enough to know how to get the upper hand. Um, but I think that they need to understand no superpower lasts forever. So even if China gets the number one position this century, they're going to find that their hegemony is so despised. Believe me, it will make any anti Americanism look like small fry. And American hegemony has been very controversial. But when the world sees the true nature of the Chinese Communist regime, when they start trying to control the internet, when they start, what China will do, China will probably won't invade countries and be engaged in wars. But what they will do is try to undermine countries from within. And some say, oh, this might sound like paranoia. Just look at all the signs, look at what's happening. We need to wake up. And I really, really feel staunchly that if this happens in our watch, it would be unforgivable. There are still powerful institutions. Johnson and Raab talk tough, but I want to see action. I want to see real action. Talk's cheap.